This is
All right,
great.
welcome back, everybody, to the Blue and Gold podcast. This is your host, Joffrey Whiteside, and I'm here with my co-host, Dean Williams. He's a class of 2017 graduate, active duty SWO, real estate investor. Going to be here providing a little bit different perspective. We have the honor of interviewing JD and Patton. JD is a 2015 graduate. Patton is a graduate of West Point, I believe 94, if that's correct.
94.
Unfortunately, right? It's Army Navy. So I'm going to be taking a few shots at these guys. But no, they are a loan officer team, and they're actually do the most VA loan originations in the entire country. There's roughly 350,000 loan officers in the country, and they are number one, which is just incredible. I know we interview a lot of high level people on this podcast, but you know, JD and Patton, it's just incredible what they have accomplished. I'm in real estate, so I know it's almost impossible to do that, to be number one out of 350,000. So welcome to the show, gentlemen, and introduce yourself to the GOATs, starting with Patton and then JD, because we always sing second, right?
Not this week, buddy. Not this week. Well, hey, Joffrey, I appreciate you having us on. And like you said earlier, you know, I'm a class of 94 from West Point. I was an Army aviator. I flew UH-60s and commanded in the 101st before I got out in 2002. And I've been in the loan business now for, gosh, over 9 years. And just excited to be part of this podcast. But, you know, we just moved over and joined an organization called UMortgage, and I'm the national director of military lending for UMortgage, and we're going to build a VA loan powerhouse. We've got, you know, about 10 people that are grads between Naval Academy, West Point, and actually we're going to bring on a Air Force Academy and a Coast Guard Academy group of guys as well. So we're building a powerhouse, and appreciate working with people like you.
Awesome. Welcome, JD.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us on, Joffrey. Dean, thanks for supporting in the background. Excited to talk to you too. Yeah, class of 15 from the Naval Academy. Joffrey, I've followed your real estate pursuits and accomplishments for many years, even before we started working together.
We'll wait for him to come back. But Patton, let's get started with your questions. So what did you do as an Army officer? Can you describe that? Any hardships, great times? Just give us an overview of your experience as an Army officer.
You know, as after flight school, my first assignment was to Korea. And so I ended up going to Korea. I was a platoon leader in Korea. Probably the best place in the world to fly. It was just, there's almost no rules over there. So you could just, you know, you could burn through town as a flight of 5, and you're looking both ways before you cross the roads. You're so low as you know, you're down below the buildings, and just, I mean, it was awesome. We had a ton of fun over there. Then I went from Korea, I went to Fort Hood, Texas, and then through the officer advanced course, and I ended up at Fort Campbell, where I commanded a UH-60 Black Hawk company. I had 15 aircraft and all the associated people. I was a company commander for 9/11, so probably before most of you guys had ever thought about being in the Army or Navy or anything. But it was pretty exciting times, and but we didn't really go anywhere at that point, and just kind of waited to see what was going on. And then I transferred out of my company command, and at that point decided that I was going to go into the wild civilian world and kind of make my way there. So I got out in 2002. So after about 8 years active duty, and then went into medical sales. I did medical sales with Johnson & Johnson and a couple other companies for, about 12 years, I guess, before I got into mortgages. And I found my calling here with mortgages. It's something I'm super passionate about and have a lot of fun doing.
Man, if I woke up from a surgery and saw you in an OR standing over me, I'd be, what has this doctor got going on? Sorry, I cut out there, gents. I'm in my library, and I don't have, the best Wi-Fi all the time.
Got you. Introduce yourself to the goats. Tell them a little bit about like your military experience and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'd love to. And if I cut out again, just feel free to keep rolling. Class of 15 from Navy, became a Marine officer after graduation, went down to Pensacola, Florida, was medically dropped from the late stages of flight school. So I'd be more than happy to talk about that too. And then went out and became the public affairs officer out of Camp Pendleton for 4 or 5 years, and that was awesome. My last case before getting out was when the AAV sank. So really challenging times, but among sadness and things like that, you can really learn a lot about yourself. And it was kind of a good way to transition into real estate and entrepreneurship. So now live in South Carolina with my wife and kids, and Patton's overworking me. We work 24/7.
Sounds about right. Sounds about right. Patton, what's one thing you would say you took from your military experience that helped you in entrepreneurship as, a loan officer?
Well, I think it all comes down to discipline. And I think the one of the big factors in my success is that, in this business, um, it can be monotonous. You do a lot of the same things day in and day out, and so you kind of have to have a rhythm to your day and a rhythm to your week, and you need to be disciplined enough to do it every single day, and do the the activities that have to happen each day. And as an entrepreneur, if you're not minding your business, there's nobody else that's going to, right? So it's important that okay, here are the 3, 4, 5 key things that I have to accomplish each and every day. And even if I get kicked in the teeth today, that's not going to demotivate me from getting up tomorrow and actually going and doing those same things, and then do it again the next day and the next day and the next day. Because it comes down to discipline and doing the right thing every day when nobody's looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. How about you, JD? What's that one
Yeah,
thing you took?
if I can elaborate, it might be two for me. The first is, when I got injured in flight school and med dropped, there was really no safety net. I mean, I was on my own, kind of fighting for the next position in the Marine Corps, which really fits nicely in with real estate, because when I got out, I was able to build my own safety net in case everything else goes crazy in the world, in my life. There's always some sort of financial safety net that could be reliable. And that's been a huge part of my transition too. And the second thing is, as a public affairs officer, just explaining complex things to people that don't have a lot of experience in what we're talking about, and why we do things, why the Marine Corps was doing things certain ways and things like that. So as a loan officer, a lot of the time it's not collecting documents, it's not locking loans, it's explaining complex things in ways that people can understand it, why we do things certain way. And that's been really, really helpful. I think getting a lot more, veterans into real estate because they can understand it.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So you guys are number one in the nation. Um, how'd you make that happen? What's beyond discipline and consistency? What would you say, like, your one thing that like separates you, or how'd you even get to that level? Like, we have a lot of like entrepreneurs that listen to this podcast just starting off. I know JD, you got off to a really fast start and stuff like that. So what's just give us some tips on what you could do to like grow your business, because at the end of the day it is a business. So just give us a few tips.
Pat, do you want to start with that?
Well, I would say, I mean, it takes absolute dedication, and it takes hard work. And in this business, really what it comes down to is, you're taking care of somebody, you're serving somebody. I'll tell you about like literally one of the first loans I ever did was, it was a refinance for a lady. She was a single mom. She had a son that was 10, 11, 12 years old, something like that. And she was almost ready to drown in debt. And she called me and she's like, "Hey, I want to refinance my house and get some cash and pay off all my debt." I'm like, "Okay, cool. Hey, I think we're going to be able to, based on what I think your house is going to appraise for, I think we can pay off everything but about 10 grand." And she goes, okay, that would be just amazing. So, so we get that. We order the appraisal. The appraisal comes in about $30,000 high. So I was able to pick up the phone and call her and go, hey, guess what? I can pay off that other 10 grand you owe. Plus, if you want, I can give you another 10 grand cash that you can kind of keep in the background and just hold on to it for a rainy day. It'll only change your mortgage payment by like $50 a month. And she burst into tears and she goes, oh my God, I owe my mom 10 grand. And so we closed that loan. That would have been like December 23rd, 2014. So almost 9 years ago. And it changed her life. And so right then I realized in this job that if you do it right and you do it well, and if you're good at what you do, that you can literally change people's lives. You can change their whole future through a great mortgage and giving them great financial advice. And so that, to me, it's, that ignited my passion for this industry and for what I do. And I think that carries you an awful long way. And there are some dark days. There are some hard days. There are days where I work 20 hours a day, when COVID first hit and the rates dropped and, my phone's blowing up and all that stuff. I mean, it was, what keeps you going? Well, heck, knowing that you're changing people's lives if you're doing a good job, that helps an awful lot.
Yeah, and I think, like from my perspective, so I sort of sit down and to the right of Patton. So he's National Director of Military Lending, and I handle a lot of the stuff, to the right of him. And Joffrey, I think like an example that you and I just did together would be a perfect example of why we've become so successful. You and I had a really complex client, and he got deployed overseas off the coast of Israel right in the middle of escrow, and we couldn't reach him. We had ship email, but he was flying, sorties all night. Couldn't reach him. And things got really complex because he had, multiple properties. There were things messed up with his certificate of eligibility. And you texted me it's pretty awesome when we have a realtor and a lender that would literally just run through a brick wall for a client. It stops at that. It's hard to find real estate professionals that truly would run through a brick wall for their client. And, the veteran space is so small comparatively that loyalty and referrals just build on top of that, because we'll stop at nothing to make sure that someone has a really good experience. And so Patton departed the company where we originated that loan when our borrower was off the coast of Israel. But I stayed back 2 weeks and just to ensure that they closed. And I just don't know outside of the service academy community and veteran community that you have that type of patience to ensure that something goes well.
That's absolutely the truth. I think it all starts with your big why. That's, you guys' big why is really focusing on the customer and doing what's really best for the customer. I know it's easy to say, but it's another thing to actually live that. And I've seen you guys live it, firsthand, which is completely awesome. So let's hop into the VA loan segment. Dean, you could take this one over.
Happy to. Hello again, JD, Patton.
Dean.
It's wonderful speaking with you.
Dean's
both.
hamstrings held up at the Naval Academy far better than mine did.
Oh yeah, we were both in there, ice baths, rehab. Whew,
Yeah,
good times.
Dean was faster than me as a plebe, so I wasn't able to hold a candle to him.
Yeah, glass cannon though. Honestly, these legs, I tell you. Well, so while we're still a little early into the episode, we have some very interesting questions for both of y'all and two very fun and polarizing quotes from a well-known social media presence. So we'll be getting your interesting opinions, very valuable opinions on both of those. So first, oh, and by the way, we're not going to name drop this person, the interesting presence, but you just might get a laugh out of it because I think you'll be able to guess who it is. So,
Okay.
First up, let's move on with the first quote. The second one we'll hold off on. All right, I'm going to read the quote and I'm going to ask you about it. But first, here's a bit about the person. So, they have a large social media presence as a financial guru. They are known for making most of their millions in real estate. And the last clue, they're known for giving very polarizing advice, such as you should buy a house all cash, and the only good debt is no debt. All right, ready?
All right, I don't think it's Gordon Ramsay. Um, might be Dave
All right,
Ramsey.
here goes.
Sorry, I think I name dropped. Patton, you want to take that one first, then I'll follow?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, a couple, you know, there's a lot of stuff I love about him, right? I do believe that you're going to be much better off in your life if you can live as debt free as you possibly can. And that's from a consumer debt and, buying cars with cash and things like that. I think that's great advice. I think real estate is a totally different thing. Um, and then, the VA loans are more expensive, he says, and that's just not true. Now there is, if you're active duty and you don't have a Purple Heart, or if you've gotten out of the military and you don't have VA disability, you do pay a VA funding fee. So theoretically, that could be a fee, and you can say that that's expensive. However, interest rates are lower with a VA loan than they are with any other loan product. And so a lot of times, I mean, there are times where I have to compare, an FHA or a conventional or a VA loan side by side for the same customer. And I go, okay, which one is going to be better for you? And which one is going to have the lower down payment? And, in depending on the exact situation and what those finances look like, there may be a better loan than a VA loan, but I'd say in a high percentage of cases, the VA is actually the cheapest loan you could do, with the lowest payment overall, and it's a super flexible loan. VA loans close at a higher rate than any other type of loan, meaning if you originate 10 VA loans, you're more likely to close 10 than if you originate 10 conventional loans, or FHA. So, I mean, I think the VA loan is the number one product in the marketplace, and I think it's the number one benefit of having served in the military is the ability to do a VA loan.
Yeah, and I'll add,
Awesome. Thank you
Dean and Joffrey, we're used to coastal areas of the United States. Like we've probably all been stationed Virginia, Florida, California, pretty relatively expensive areas for service members. So we obviously have our base salaries and we have basic housing allowance that can fluctuate year to year. There can be additions to basic housing allowance from one year to another. And I think if you cage his opinion based on he lost it all, after declaring bankruptcy because he took out a lot of debt, then I think all of his opinions, if you take it with that asterisk in mind, make total sense. He's trying to protect his family, he's trying to protect his legacy. And so I would be a staunch advocate of that too. If I felt something so, into my inner core like that, I'd probably be a staunch advocate of no debt either. But if you take the average military family, if they get stationed in Norfolk and they're 23, 24 years old, they're married, they're making, $70,000 to $90,000 a year, they're not going to be able to afford a house in cash. And renting over the course of your career isn't, the easiest thing to do either. It's not just a breeze decision. Oh, I'm just going to rent. It's just the easiest thing in the world. No, there's a lot to take into account, with that. You're not building equity in your house. There's no tax incentives. And there's also something to say for just a feeling of home, which at the end of the day is what we do. We get people into homes, which is amplified around the holidays. I mean, I love being, in my home. So I think that's
absolutely.
my answer.
I'm gonna piggyback off of that. It's one thing to say that. It's another thing to live it. Like if I waited to buy all the single family homes I own in cash, I would probably only have like one right now. To be honest with you, I have multiple homes that cash flow, and the cash flow actually keeps me safe at the end of the day, right? I buy in areas that appreciate over time. So there's a tactic to it, right? Now, if you go out and just buy anything, you might be, at risk. But when you buy in these areas that appreciate over time and look at the, rental income, and a lot of the times, rent is way more expensive than actually buying a property, getting a mortgage. So I think it's kind of like a twofold thing. But in my experience, I couldn't have like built the wealth that I've built following, Dave Ramsey's plan, which there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's honestly different strokes for different folks. But you know, as long as you can analyze, properties, analyze like areas and stuff like that, and really think about what you're buying, I think it's kind of hard to lose in real estate when you hang on to it for the long run.
No, and
Yeah.
I think you're right, Joffrey. I mean, think of it this way. Like, let's say your desire was I want to buy my first house, but I'm going to save up and pay cash for it. And let's say that first house is going to be $400,000. You can save an awful lot long time and put your money in a mutual fund, or put your money in a, you know, wherever it's going to kind of grow over time in a relatively safe place. It's going to take you a long time to get to 400,000. And guess what? Over that 10 or 15 or 20 years it takes you to save up that 400,000, guess what? That price of that house went from 400,000 to 700,000. And so
Yeah.
now you're still $300,000 behind. Whereas if you had used a product like a VA loan to get into that $400,000 house today, you would have taken that money you were paying on rent, and your balance would be paid down to 250,000, but the value is now 700, and now you've actually got $450,000 of wealth that you built over time, and you could have still been saving money on the side. I just think it's short-sighted to go, oh, you should buy a house all in cash.
I I
The
think
other
that's
part,
why
though,
I think that's why
go
like
ahead, Judy.
a lot of seniors or things like that, you'll see like reverse mortgage ads, is because if you spend a long time getting to a place where you own your real estate in cash, that's great. It feels really good, and you're not writing a check to a bank once a month. But once that asset's paid off and there's no cash flow to continue, if you stop working, you still have bills that you have to keep up with. You still have healthcare costs. If you don't have cash flow, all of a sudden now you're looking back at your asset trying to get liquidity from it. So I think focusing on cash flow for a lot of people, not all, may be, more beneficial, because I think a lot of people find themselves in that position. They own their house in cash, but now they're in retirement. They're like, wait, nothing is paying me. There's no spread between what I'm paying on my mortgage and what I'm bringing on an income.
Wise words, wise words.
Absolutely.
Picking the right place, making sure that it cash flows, that being what provides that safety. Can't buy just any house,
Yeah.
but buy the right one, and it doesn't have to be all cash. That's the case.
Absolutely. I have a solid question that I get asked a lot. Using a VA loan more than once. Can you just speak on that subject as a whole? Like, how many times you can use it? What's the limits? A lot of people don't even know you can use it more than once. So speak on that a little bit.
Go ahead, JD.
Yeah, and Joffrey, you're really good at educating people on this, and we do it a lot together. If you take out underwriting rules and debt to income and all of that stuff and kind of put it on the back burner for a little bit, which are some mortgage terms that we use to make sure that a borrower looks healthy, you can use your VA loan multiple times. And just getting that word across, and I'll just start there. That'll be my contribution to this part of the conversation. You can use your VA loan multiple times, and working with real estate professionals that also understand that and how to do it is really, really important. It does not mean that it can't get complicated. It can get very complicated, but you are not limited to using what we think is one of the best loan products in a wide array of, mortgage options. You can't use it more than once.
Yeah.
Patton, you can fill in the rest.
Okay, yeah. I mean, bottom line is, if you could buy a house, sell that house, buy another one, sell that house, buy another one, sell that house, and you could do that forever. You could use a VA loan 100 times, just as long as you sell that previous house. Now, you can also have multiple VA loans at the same time. The complication there becomes, what is the county loan limit in the county that you're buying a house? So most counties starting January 1st of 2024 are going to be $766,000. Okay, so if you're a young graduate of the Naval Academy and you're headed to Pensacola, Florida, the county loan limit is 766,000. So you can go buy your first house. I mean, technically you're unlimited on your first, if you don't have any VA loan entitlement being used, you're unlimited. You could go buy, if you could afford the payment, you can buy a $4 million house.
Yeah.
But if you go to Pensacola, let's say you buy a $350,000 house. The county loan limit is 766,000. So let's say you now PCS to Corpus Christi. The county loan limit there is 766,000. You've already used 350,000 in Pensacola, and now you're turning that into a rental house. You still have $416,000 where you can go to Corpus and buy another house in Corpus or Virginia Beach. I know a great realtor in Virginia Beach, if you guys don't know him. You know, so you can go up there and you can use the rest of your entitlement to buy that second property. So yeah, you can have multiple VA loans, and right after graduating from the Naval Academy is a great way to start. You go to your first duty station, buy your first one, turn that into a rental. It's cash flowing. You go to your next duty station, buy your second one. Off you go.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
that's like another,
So this happened.
that's another unique thing about our job type. Military officers, enlisted military, we're forced to move around a lot, which gives one more particularly advantageous loan type, which is a primary purchase. If you think historically, like when we were growing up, if your parents weren't military, it was not uncommon for them to buy one house on a conventional mortgage, stay there for 30 years because they were never forced to go anywhere. I think COVID changed that because people were able to work remotely and things like that. But that alone is such an advantage to anybody interested in real estate. I don't think people realize how powerful it is to be able to purchase primary residences and have employment that follows you, because it's really rare in the long history of, you know, real estate investing. It just has not been an option for people our age. It's really rare for people to hop all over the country buying primary residences every 3 years. And you can, you know, have all of the advantages of that loan product every time. If I was to go try to buy a house in Virginia Beach right now because I'm out of the military, I have a much more, you know, classic example. I live in South Carolina. I would have to put likely 25% down. My interest rate would be way worse. I would have strict underwriting guidelines. And you're looking at, you know, you're starting to get into a pretty complex, you know, real estate portfolio, but we have the advantage of simplicity. We're moving, our employment's following. It's pretty awesome.
Right. Just due to the nature of what we do, we move around, and it's a great thing to use that as an advantage.
Yeah.
What we're saying.
Totally.
Absolutely.
We grow accustomed to that, and we forget that that's really rare. That's super rare.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Patton, what happens, because this happened to me, that's why I'm asking. What happens if you don't have enough entitlement? Let's say if you go over that, you know, 766,000. What happens from then if you want to use the VA loan?
Well, as long as you have some entitlement remaining. So let's say you used 500,000 on your first house and now you have 266,000 left. So 266,000 would be the limit to what you can buy with no down payment whatsoever. However, if you wanted to buy a house that exceeded what your VA entitlement remaining was, you can still do that. You just have to, there's going to be a gap. Let's say your max loan amount with no down payment is 266, and let's say you found a house that you wanted to buy that was 366. So there's a $100,000 gap there. You have to put a 25% down payment on that gap. So now you're buying a $366,000 house with just a $25,000 down payment. Still a much better loan and a much better product than any conventional or FHA product, but you may be required to put some down payment down in a certain situation.
Okay, definitely makes sense. I see.
Now, you mentioned a few loans during our conversation: VA, FHA, and conventional loan. Patton. Which of those would you say that most of the public knows least about?
Well, just by nature of who is eligible for these types of loans, VA loans are the least known out of all of them. If you talk to a realtor, you know, the average realtor, and say, you know, they'll say, oh yeah, I know about VA loans, I know about them. But the vast majority of the public in the United States, they're eligible for conventional loans and they're eligible for FHA loans. Literally every single person that can buy a house is probably eligible for both of those loan types. depending on if they had bankruptcies and foreclosures and all that stuff, right? But let's say it's just the average person. They can do both of those. The only people that can do a VA loan are the people that served the requisite amount of time, either active duty or Guard or reserves. And so that automatically, we just cut the population down to about, what, 10% of, probably less than that, like 7, 8% of the public actually has served our country in the military. And so you have a very small subset of people that are actually eligible for this. And then if you look, I mean, then you look at like loan officers. I know loan officers that have never done a VA loan ever. And it blows my mind. They know nothing about them. Same thing with realtors. I talked to a realtor the other day and he goes, yeah, I've been in real estate for 33 years and I don't think I've ever done a VA loan. So tell me about how, I've heard horror stories about VA loans. Like, tell me about it. I'm like, man, the VA loan is the easiest loan you can ever do, So there are a lot of people out there that just, by the nature of where they live or just their community and who they know, they're just never going to run across VA loans. So it's certainly the least known out of all of them as far as the specifics.
And I think the way to identify, sorry if I'm delayed, but I think a good way to identify a loan officer that's inexperienced with a VA loan is if they blame the VA for pretty much anything, because the VA doesn't interact with us really at all. I think, and Patton taught me some of this because a lot of this exists between realtors, and loan officers. If they're blaming the VA for something, it just means that something has gone wrong in originating the file. There are definite cases where deep in underwriting, in final underwriting, where an underwriter may ask for some sort of supporting documentation from the VA or an exception document from the VA. So those are cases, those do occur. And that is complex because you're waiting on a government organization to give you a document, which can take a long time. But outside of that, a VA loan is mostly internal to the underwriters, the bank, and the lender. So I think, in the early 2000s, there were so many loan officers, whatever, they were blaming the VA for things. And so it got this stigma that was just, this is a complex loan, the VA is going to be involved and all this stuff, and it's just not true. I think FHA has gotten a lot of publicity lately on TikTok, which is awesome because it's a great loan product. I think it's easy for a TikToker to say, look, you can go down to 3.5%, you can buy a quadplex, and it's a great way to, get in a property, rent out the other units. That's awesome. And FHA is great, but it's not the cheapest loan. There are other things that come along with FHA that sometimes make conventional a better option. Joffrey and I wade through this a lot. And that's a loan officer's job, is to work with the real estate agent and say, hey, the borrower's interested in this, but why don't we look at some of the advantage of this property and see if, conventional is a better option or something like that.
So we'd say that VA loans most of the time are the best option.
Yeah, if we can get them to, if we can use a VA loan on a property, it's 100% of the time it's going to be the best fit. If all of the underwriting conditions and things like that, make sense, when you're originating a loan, you structure the file a certain way to make sure it all makes sense, and that down the line it's going to stay in a good rhythm, and you're not, going to find out that they're not actually getting stationed in Maine and they haven't gotten their orders yet and things like that. But most of the time, yeah, VA loan knocks the socks off of all the other loans.
Well, especially considering what the down payment requirements are, right? So a VA loan, the number one benefit of a VA loan is that you can do it with zero down payment. But along with that is when you put a lower down payment, let's say you do a 3.5% down payment on an FHA loan, or let's say you do a 5% down payment on a conventional loan, then those loans, in addition to all of the other fees and everything, in your monthly payment, you're going to pay mortgage insurance. So you're going to pay what's called PMI. And so that PMI can be, it's going to depend on, well, FHA, it's a set number, but for conventional, it's going to depend on your credit score. So if your credit score is 800, your PMI is going to be relatively low. But if your credit score is 640 or 660, you may pay like 1% of the loan amount in PMI every year. So if you have a $400,000 loan, 1% of that's $4,000. All of a sudden, you're paying $330 a month in PMI on top of your principal and on top of your interest on top of your taxes and insurance. And that's a fee that wouldn't even exist on a VA loan. The reason for that is because just by definition, what a VA loan is that the government or the VA specifically is guaranteeing 25% of your loan amount, is guaranteeing that to the bank. So as a lender, if I'm doing a VA loan and let's say you borrow $400,000 from me, if you never make a payment and I foreclose on your house 6 months from now or whatever, I don't have to sell your house for $400,000. I only have to sell it for $300,000 because the VA is going to make me whole with that other 100,000. Okay, so because of that, it makes it a very safe loan. So that PMI, that mortgage insurance, what the purpose of that is, you're actually paying an insurance company to insure the bank for you. With a VA loan, because the VA is already insuring your loan, you don't have to pay any insurance fee. That's why that exists and why the VA loan is such a great product.
So this PMI sounds like a pretty unique drawback to FHA. It's something you would want to avoid. Pick VA over FHA for. But
yeah, I mean, I've run pretty big offices before, and I've told the loan officers in my office that if they put a veteran that's eligible for a VA loan, if they put them in an FHA loan, I'm going to fire them on the spot. And I'm not kidding. I mean, that's true. If you're eligible for a VA loan and somebody puts you in an FHA loan, you're paying probably a higher interest rate. You're paying PMI. You're paying all this. FHA actually has something that's called. Well, it's very similar to the VA funding fee. So it has all the same costs as the VA loan, except then it has that monthly cost on top of it that lasts for the life of the loan. It never goes away. And so It's a horrific loan if you have the option of doing a VA loan instead. Now, it's a great loan in the right situation and the right, when you need that FHA loan. I mean, it's a great product for the right situation. But a veteran is, unless your VA loan entitlement is all used up, there's no reason you would ever want to do an FHA loan.
Right. So there may be, it sounds like from what you're saying, there may be a point where a veteran could use a FHA loan and be making the right choice, but it should be after they use up the.
That's right. And I've done those before for a guy that's let's say he's an 04 at this point, and he used his VA loan the first time at his first duty station, used a VA loan again, maybe even used a VA loan a third time, and now they're PCSing, they own all these houses, and now they're PCSing and they want to buy a house, but maybe they don't have a ton of cash, or maybe they do have cash and they just don't want to spend it all. I mean, a 3.5% down payment FHA loan is not a bad option.
Solid. Makes sense. How about the rehab loans? You touch on like the VA rehab. I know JD has done a couple for me. Can you just touch on rehab loans just in general, and what's the concept behind them, what the numbers look like, what's the maximum like rehab, things like that?
Go ahead, JD.
Joffrey, you're a rarity in the real estate space, because not only do you have clients that are interested in all of these different products, you're also well versed in them too. So it makes for a very cohesive kind of unit that's going into this complex mortgage space. But we do a lot of VA renovation loans, and we do them all over the country. Typically, how it starts is a borrower has enough eligibility left in their VA entitlement to be able to pull the trigger on a spot. Let's say that we identify something during your walkthrough or in the listing that either the borrower wants to fix or make upgrades to the property, or because you've experienced with the VA loan, you identify something during the walkthrough that you think this isn't going to pass a VA appraisal. And the VA appraisal is mostly to identify the potential value of the home, but also other inhabitability and livability issues that could make this situation not great for a veteran borrower. So in the events that we identify those, you can just change the loan product if you're licensed in VA renovation loans, which there really aren't that many places and people that are or understand them. And what we do is we walk through with the borrower and we make a basic estimate up front. Let's say the purchase price is $400,000. And between the things that we've identified that we don't think will pass a VA appraisal, like let's say there needs to be mold abatement, there's a foundation issue, and it probably needs a full new roof. And the sellers indicated that they're not interested in doing anything. It's as is. The seller's not going to contribute to anything like this. They're not going to fix it. And then we set aside, let's say, $100,000 of that loan amount. So the full loan amount would be $500,000, $400,000 purchase price, $100,000 renovation budget. And then the borrower contacts a general contractor who satisfies a few requirements. It doesn't need to be some, super big thing like the contractor has to be, have been working with the VA for 50 years and all this stuff. They just need to satisfy a certain amount of things, and they can submit paperwork to the VA to be approved for it. The contractor walked through with, yeah.
Can we pause right? Just make sure your contractor is like willing to do the paperwork. I know we ran across that a few times. Some, they go to the property, give the quote, and then all of a sudden, the VA has, obviously they have their requirements, or the underwriter has their requirements, and they have to submit the paperwork. And in a good bit of them just, shy away. I don't know for what reason, but they do. So make sure your contractor has either done it before, or willing to submit that paperwork, because we ran into some issues with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead. I just want to put that one in.
Perfectly said. And if you're getting the sense that the contractor either isn't diligent or organized enough to pursue this opportunity, then it's not going to be a great fit. But you said it really well. I think a lot of contractors shy away from it because there may just be easier money to make the property next door. They could go replace the floors, make 20 grand and move on, and they don't want to get into this big job and lose other jobs because they're working on this. But so we're at the stage where we've set aside $100,000 in essence for this project. The contractor walks through with the borrower and says, if you want to make upgrades XYZ, and we're going to work on the mold, we're going to work on the roof, and we're going to work on the foundation, the total cost of this project is $96,000. And they send us a scope of work. We take that scope of work, we essentially staple it to the back of the appraisal request, but it's digital. And when the VA appraiser accepts the bid, they go to the property and they walk through the property as if this work has already been completed. So when the VA appraiser is looking at the roof, they're basing the value off of that work being completed and what the market would dictate for that price. Same thing for whatever upgrades the borrower wants to do too. If they want to do new countertops, new flooring, replace all the doors, some paint, the VA appraiser is going to be well, versed in what that's worth on the open market if the house was to be listed at that, price and at that quality today. So when we receive the appraisal back, there's a line where the appraiser checks as is or subject to. As is means the property is worth this today, and in the event that it wasn't a renovation loan, obviously that would kill the deal because typically you're not going to get the value for the house or whatever. For a VA renovation loan, they'll check subject to, and it's subject to the scope of work being completed. And so when we receive it and the underwriter reviews it, they say, oh, this is justified at $500,000 because the appraiser is saying that after this work is complete, the loan is safe. And sometimes the scope of work isn't always validated by the appraiser. Sometimes they'll say, I think that this $96,000 project will only return $71,000 to the market value. So the appraisal comes in at $471, subject to all of the renovations. So we know that we need to trim down the scope of work with the contractor to make sure it fits. So that relationship is important because the contractor could say, okay, well, I can be flexible here. How about we don't replace all the doors? Because that's clearly not replacing value. That's purely cosmetic. That's something that you want to do. And then it proceeds like a normal VA loan. It's typically a longer escrow because think of all the moving parts. I mean, it's not just the lender that you're waiting on. It's the borrower because the borrower has got a little bit of more work to do. They got to be in contact with the contractors. Contractors probably dealing with a lot, especially in the Virginia market. Norfolk's booming, so they probably have a few different projects that they're balancing. So 45 days is probably a good idea. And then after you close on the property, the renovations can start, and it's a little more similar to what you'd expect. The contractor starts working, and they draw out of a big account once they meet the work requirements. And then after work is complete, the borrower moves in. The
Right.
other things that you should consider is typically it carries a higher interest rate like any renovation loan. Like Joffrey, conventional, any type of renovation loan comes with a little bit of a higher interest rate. But still, think about what type of loan product you're getting here. It's remarkable. You can go 0% down, which is crazy, which is unbelievably advantageous. You can finance all of the renovation, and you're still able to use a loan product that typically, may not work on a property. So it's pretty phenomenal. And we've seen some use cases that are amazing. Pat and I did a pretty complex one for a Naval Academy couple that turned a dentist's office back into a single family residence because the appraisal came in and the appraiser said, yeah, if you're going to change the zoning, you're going to do all this, we'll justify it.
Yeah, it was an old historic building. It was amazing.
It's awesome. That is completely awesome.
And this appraising, the estimating of the price, all these things that can determine whether the deal is going to be valuable and successful or not. This is all done, all those steps prior to closing, what you were saying earlier, right?
That's right. It's all done prior to closing. And having a real estate agent partner that understands that is critical. Like the amount of work that Joffrey does to ensure that the listing agent who's selling this property understands what a VA renovation loan cannot be understated. The deal wouldn't get accepted. The offer wouldn't get accepted unless you have someone that really understands this and can help coach listing agents through this, because the listing agent doesn't want to put their seller in a position where they've accepted this kind of, seemingly rare, financing type. But when you're working with someone like Joffrey, who literally will call the listing agent and spend an hour on the phone with them talking through how this works, and then I'll get on the phone too. It's giving veterans an awesome opportunity that, it just takes a little bit more work.
Right. And the recurring theme here seems level of knowledge and the limited pool of people who have that knowledge. So for our listeners who are very interested in finding those, what advice would you?
We will drop our cell phone numbers in this chat. and I know Joffrey will too. But it's true. It's true. There are not, there's a really small pool of people that understand this and close a lot of them. We probably do more VA renovation loans than most loan officers do VA loans. So it's just comes with repetition and understanding the unique, cases.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Talk a little bit about VA assumptions. That's kind of been a big topic over, the last really year and a half. Patton, I don't know, you've been in the business a long time. I don't know if you have any insight, best practices on that. I know I've done a few, but do you have any insight on those VA assumptions?
Well, the bottom line is on a VA assumption. So just to kind of explain what that looks like is somebody bought a house on a VA loan, and they have an interest rate that might be pretty attractive, right? If they bought a house in 2020 or 2021 on a VA loan, they probably have no worse than a 2.75% interest rate. That looks really, really pretty in today's market. So the VA loan is what's called an assumable loan, which basically means if I bought a house and I have 2.25% interest rate on my house and I want to sell that house, I can let somebody else come in and just basically take over my loan. And now they have my 2.25% interest rate, and I can walk away, and now they're paying that mortgage. But that mortgage actually gets transferred to them, right? So it's not on my credit report anymore. It's transferred to them. Okay. So the key part is, you got to find a house that has a lower interest rate that's in a VA loan that you want to buy. Second thing is, though, and here's where the issue is with assumptions is you can only assume the current loan balance that exists today. So, Joffrey, if you bought a house in 2021 for $400,000 and now you're going to sell it, well, guess what's happened over the last couple of years? That $400,000 house is now worth potentially $500,000 or $600,000. So when you're selling it, even though you have a VA loan at 2.25%, you're wanting to sell it for $600,000. and I come in there and I go, hey, I want to assume your $400,000 loan, which is now paid down to 370 or something. I want to assume that loan at 2.25, and you're like, cool, but where's the difference? Where's that $230,000 gap between the 370 you owe and the 600 you're selling it for? There's not a loan for that. There aren't any lenders out there giving 100% financing and giving you a secondary mortgage for that. There may be some places that you could get partial loan or whatever. I mean, if you can borrow it, you can do it, but I don't know anybody that's giving that loan. So essentially, if you don't have cash to pay that difference between the sales price and what's currently owed, it's probably not an option for you. The second thing you need to know is, let's say somebody bought it a year and a half ago, and they have a 4.75 or a 5%. That's still a really good interest rate in today's market, but they don't have a ton of equity. So maybe it makes sense to do it. But what you need to do, and what everybody needs to be aware of, is that instead of going through a loan officer like me or like JD, the route to do it is you have to go to the people that currently own that mortgage, the servicer of the current mortgage, and you have to do all the paperwork through them. And it's a 60 to 90 day, maybe even longer process, depending on the servicer. It could be, I've heard of like 6 months. So it can be a thing, and so you just got to be aware of that at the very beginning of it. And then the third thing I would say is that if you're in a position where you're thinking about allowing somebody to assume your VA loan, make sure, like, pound on the table, make sure that they have VA eligibility and that they are going to not only assume your loan, but that the eligibility that you have used up on that loan is going to get transferred to their VA eligibility. Otherwise, your VA eligibility is just going to stick with that house. And now when you go to try to buy your next house, you're screwed. You don't have any VA eligibility because it's stuck with, that other person's house now. So,
Yeah.
And there's sort of a catch-22. I actually don't know what catch-22 really means, so I could be using this totally wrong, but I think this is a catch-22. Let's just use Naval Academy grads as an example. Joffrey, most Naval Academy grads, when they contact you to buy a house in Norfolk, they needed that house like yesterday. Rarely are people thinking like that far out. So yes, for the seller, it's definitely a good way to advertise the property. However, most of our borrowers are really under a tight timeline to move and to free up their eligibility so they can buy in their next location. And so stringing that along can really make it complicated, because then you're putting in contingent offers in your next duty station, and it's contingent on a VA loan assumption, which is like how not to win a deal. So that's just something to consider. I just had a conversation with one of our borrowers today who got an offer to assume his loan. Great interest rate because he bought, a year and a half ago, but he's closing on a house in 31 days. There's no way to do that. And then from the loan officer side, right away, you're going to face a debt to income issue, because if we have to wait for that house to sell, then it's not going to make an on-time closing. And if they decide to put a renter in it because the assumption falls apart, and they've rented another house for a month up in Virginia while they're waiting for that renter to get in there, all of a sudden you have pretty complicated underwriting rules. So it can just get weird. It can just get weird. But if you get a sweet 2.75% interest rate and there's only a little bit of a margin where you have to cover in cash, man, that's sweet.
I think getting the sellers wants is a big thing. I know if the seller has flexibility and they don't need to go, like, for example, if they're getting stationed overseas, they might not need the money right away. They're not looking to buy a house overseas, so they might be willing to work with that buyer. So I think it
example,
depends. Yeah, it depends case by case. What's Patton? What's a piece of advice you would give either a young West Point grad or a Naval Academy grad on just life in general? It doesn't have to be like real estate related. Just in general, what's a couple pieces of advice you give?
You know what? I'll give you the one thing that I tell this to a lot of people, and maybe it's because I'm getting old. Like JD is always making fun of how old I am now. Um, you
It's
know,
true.
I think the older you get, like when you guys are, when you're an '01 and an '02 and an '03, and you're PCSing from place to place, you go to the commissary and you go to the PX and you get off your ship in Thailand or wherever the heck you are, and you're running into classmates and you run into, you're all doing this kind of the same things, right? You're running into your classmates' places and you kind of take it for granted because you're surrounded by them. And after you get out and then you take a civilian job, and then you start that down that pathway of your civilian life, you can easily lose touch with people, and you can kind of you get buried in your own life and the things that are going on, and you lose touch. And what I would tell you is, like, when let's say you get out of the Navy and you start, you're in a civilian job, and let's say you travel for work somewhere. One thing my class has done a really good job of is building community. And we've got our class Facebook page, but you see on there all the time, people going, "Hey, I was in the airport in Atlanta. Look who I ran into," and it's a classmate. And they take a selfie and they post it on there. And I mean, we have people run into each other in Malaysia and Japan and random places around the world. They just happen to run into, or they're intentional and they go, "Hey, is anybody in Denver that has 3 hours and wants to have dinner? Because I've got a little bit of free time as I'm there for work." And so, the older I get, the more I see it is, the community of what you went through for 4 years at the academy is special, and that bond is special. And you should remember that and use that and continue to build that community, lean on it, offer that assistance. Like, I run into classmates. Heck, I ran into a classmate at the grocery store near my house. Didn't even, and he had a West Point shirt on, and I'm like, "Oh, you went to West Point?" He goes, "Yeah." And I go, "What year were you?" He goes, "'94." I go, "Oh man, we're classmates. What's your name?" I'd never seen him before, never heard his name before, and he lives like 2 miles from me, and now we like hang out periodically. And so just create the community, or use the community to just stick together and do everything you can to uplift and help the people to your left and right. And that's what I think that would be the biggest piece of advice I would give you.
Just help.
I'm not nearly old enough to be making these types of things, but I'll do my best here. Um, I think, among other things, if I was talking to a young West Point grad, I'd say you made a terrible decision, terrible, life-alteringly bad decision. If I was talking to a young Naval Academy grad, oh boy, oh, the Goat Awards. um, I think, at least from the mortgage side, I would say give yourself like give yourself some grace. I think a lot of veterans, active duty, you just forget how much you have going on in your life, and what you're actually accomplishing is pretty amazing compared within our age group. It's really common for people to shoot me a text like, "Hey, my credit has fallen a couple points this month. Like, I know I should have more cash." Stop, just stop. Give yourself some grace. Like, you have pretty much the weight of the world on your shoulders. Spouses are being deployed to dangerous areas. You're being forced to move around the holidays. Just take a breath, give yourself some grace, and like, everyone is just trying to figure out life. I don't know. It's like people just need to take a deep breath and just be nicer to themselves.
But to kind of combine those two things, don't be afraid to ask for help either. I've run into classmates that I hadn't seen in 25 years, and I start talking to them, and I'm like, "Man, you disappeared for like 20 years. Like, you didn't come to a reunion, you weren't on the Facebook page, you weren't." And they go, "Yeah, I went through a tough time, and I just kind of felt like I was alone out there." Right. And so, offer assistance to people, be vulnerable, be vulnerable enough to ask for help, and you'd be surprised what the people around you will do to help you and lift you up. And that's what this community is all about. That's what it should be about anyway.
And I think it's also cool about this particular like network is I think a lot of military networks, they'll kind of say failure as like a cliche talking point. They'll be like, yes, let's talk about our failures. And then they won't. They'll just continue talking about like their successes. At least in this network and group, you literally can say what you made a mistake doing. So I had a late Amex payment when I was active duty because I was in the field. So my credit tanked. When I moved into my first multifamily, I was doing renovations and I thought I paid our mortgage and I didn't. So I had a late mortgage payment on my credit too. Those two things, yeah, that leads to, real life ramifications where you can't buy a house for another year if you have, in most cases, if you have those missed payments. And so like I feel like it's network, we don't hide any of that stuff. It's like I think that's really important when you're building your professional network is don't just allow people to talk about failure as a talking point. Really dial in and say, what did you do? What was your mistake?
That's why people on the show, like, what are some of your mistakes? A lot of times you see on social media, you just see the highlights. No, I want to know your mistakes so I don't make those mistakes. And I think people, just as a whole, people like to hide their mistakes, and I don't think that's the way to go. But definitely, like the camaraderie and everything is really important. I have people, reach out to me all the time. Hey, I'm not, doing so well mentally. You got time to talk? And I gladly talk to them. So, don't be afraid to, reach out and be vulnerable, because the likelihood someone has gone through your struggle before, and they got help and overcame it. So I think that's super important. But I appreciate you guys being on the show. I know you guys' dollar per hour is like super high. Like I said, number one VA lender, in the nation. So I appreciate you, you taking time to talk to the goats and everything like that. Patton, where can they find you at? JD, where can the goats find you at?
Well, my email is pgade@umortgage.com, and my phone number 623-866-3974. It's always on, and I'm always available. And JD,
This weekend you can find me watching the goats roll into town, baby. No, I wish I was getting up to the game. Yeah, my email's jkameen@umortgage.com, and my cell phone's 443-904-6160. Yeah, I mean, you literally could text me and be like, hey, how did you miss your mortgage payment? Like, let's talk about it, whatever. But you have to link up with Joffrey Whiteside. I mean, we work with a lot of real estate professionals, and I say it all the time in text messages and stuff. From top to bottom, Joffrey's staff is like world class, and that is huge when you're navigating a complex market. Like from his other members on his staff that offer opinion to his administrative assistants. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
Appreciate that. Shout out to Dean for doing this first podcast. He did a great job.
Dean,
thank you. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed everything.
I miss you, buddy.
Miss you too.
Thanks for having us, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Yep. Take care. This is Joffrey Whiteside signing out.